you end up with people being imported and being able to vote just as somebody who's been here for 50 years. It doesn't make that literally makes no sense. All right, so let's actually dig into what Florida can do to prepare or to react to Mamdani being elected mayor of New York City. Okay, so as I said, Florida has had a huge problem with population increase, specifically in the last 20 years, but more focused on the last 5 years since 2020. 300,000 people a year. All right, so how do we do this? All right, first of all, I would highly encourage a start of discussion at the very least in the legislature on different ideas. My top 10, Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott have talked about something called tariffs from specific states. That will be hard to get through legislatively, or not judicially, because of constitutional interpretations. And so what you can do is create a residential fee, right? So a new resident, a person who is not born to somebody living in Florida that is a current Florida resident, before they can become a permanent resident of Florida, they need to pay a fee. I've listed it as $10,000. That's high enough to pay for. It's kind of like an impact fee for a new house, right? So if somebody builds a new house, they have to pay their impact fees before they can get a residence. Before they can start building, really. And so that's to pay for the fire department. That's the idea behind it. And so the $10,000 should go into a sovereign wealth fund of Florida, and to pay for to relieve the tax burden of Floridians already living here because of the increased infrastructure costs that will be necessitated, and it will also cut off more people from wanting to move here. Second of all, I would do a quota, a new residency quota. So realize I'm saying new residency, or permanent residency rather, new and permanent residency. If you're living here, if you're moving here in a timeshare, you're not going to pay this, right? This is made up in other ways, in other forms of revenue for the state of Florida. And it turns out you leave and you go home. But the new residents here in Florida should pay a $10,000 new residency fee, and then there should be a quota of maximum 100,000 people moving to Florida. Now, you'll get major pushback on that one, specifically from the developers, the people that are building, tearing down forests and farmland and cattle land and what Florida is and was into houses that basically make you look like you're living in New York City. I mean, maybe not New York City, but Long Island. Like, have you ever looked on a map of Queens? Or basically, it's little bitty yard, houses as far as you can see. Why do we need that here in Florida? Move to another state. The government of Florida should first, governments are instituted to protect the people that live here, not the people who live somewhere else. Not to encourage more people to move here. It's to protect. It's basically, think of it as a giant HOA, so to speak. Now, HOAs end up being massively intrusive, so do governments, but there's very little difference between the two. And so if the government is going to exist, it should exist to protect people who are here. It shouldn't be this okay, oh well, we want that person to come in. They're struggling over there, so they should come here and struggle and then compete with somebody else for housing. All right? So I have a buddy who's looking to buy a house. Okay? he doesn't get a massive salary increase every year. He ends up being this, but as soon as the market starts to kind of level off from 2020, you get something like this, and then you will get possibly a million New York City residents of New York City have said that they'll move out if Mamdani wins. Okay, so let's assume half of those move to Florida. So you got a 500,000 resident boom in Florida, outcompeting the people who are living here, the people who are just getting started here in Florida, and so this will allow people like him to maybe not outcompete, but not be as harmed from that. It will maybe encourage people to move to California, Washington, or Oregon, somewhere else besides Florida, Tennessee, and Texas, or pretty much anywhere in the South. Like I said, I went to Williamsburg this past month, and what I realized is that rural Virginia, very nice. Central, like the cities of Virginia, very terrible, very, very liberal. They end up being these, there was an election this week in Virginia, and where the whole state is basically legislated by Richmond and Charlottesville, and then Alexandria, the northern part close to DC, where all the government contractors live. And so all those people vote Democrat because D.C. is 90% Democrat. Washington, D.C., the people, residents of Washington, D.C. And so what ends up happening is that you have the spillover into Maryland and Virginia. Now, I've suggested that Virginia cede their portion of Washington, D.C. that was kind of reserved after the Civil War back to D.C. and possibly give the conservative voice a better chance, or the more rural voice a chance. I want to distinguish between the two because conservatives the idea of conservative has been split in 15 different directions, which ends up being the product of success, so to speak, of winning an election. That's the coalition tends to break up, and that's what the Republicans have been for so long. Or for at least the past 15 years. 15 years? Yeah, 15 years. Ever since Obama, there's been coalitions to try to get to coalesce against the Democrats, because with immigration and with foreign-born being the highest it's ever been in United States history, you end up with a competing factor. You end up with people being imported and being able to vote just as somebody who's been here for 50 years. It doesn't make that literally makes no sense. And then thirdly, all right. So you got a new residency fee of $10,000, a maximum quota. I listed it as 100,000. People, I immediately got some pushback that said, no, it should be none. Well, you can't do that, but you should have a maximum new residency quota. And then lastly, third, you should have a probationary period before you become a full-on resident. That means you don't get the homestead exemption. You don't get voting full voting rights. What that looks like, we can go into maybe in a future episode. You might have trouble getting that with national elections, but you might be able to do that with state and local elections because. Like the Thornton decision in the 90s decided that Florida can't institute its own term limits on representatives and people who are elected to the national government, but you can still do it to the federal government. So you might be able to get away with reducing the amount of people who move in and immediately vote to be like where they came from. So I've said like a 5-year probationary period that allows you almost a full cycle of everyone. I know senators are 6 years, but getting up to 10 was a little. I wouldn't say no to that, but it's a little odd for it to be that long. But I say 5 years would be a good minimum voting chance. So they don't immediately vote here. Come here, change your cult, change the outcompete you on housing and for goods and services, and then they don't outcompete you for voting for their government. So because if they move and they live within that area, they get the same person, they get the same vote to cancel out the person who's lived there all their life's vote. And that doesn't seem right at all.